Hey friends, it's Matt with BoLS, and today we are taking a look at Doctor Who Nemesis. Doctor Who Nemesis is a competitive game that sets each player as one of 4 different infamous Doctor Who Nemeses. You can play as the Daleks, the Weeping Angels, the Cybermen, or the Master. Each of those factions has 2 different characters you can play as. One of the most immediately eye-catching things about this game is how many different ways there are to play. And that's sort of, I think, the big takeaway from this game is the replayability and how often you may or may not find yourself wanting to replay it, because I think that factors into what makes the game really good, and also maybe not necessarily for everyone. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Overall, the game has a dead simple gameplay loop. On your turn, you take your character and you move it to a location on your character board, and you do those 2 things, and that's basically it. And I always really appreciate a game that has figured out a way to boil down the entire loop into something that simple. Like, there's other things, like eventually you gain minions and you move them around, and there's a combat mechanic sort of layered on top as well, but ultimately that's what you're doing. And I really appreciate games that have the ability to be boiled down to such a simple, digestible sentence of here's what you do on your turn, then other aspects, mechanics, systems, whatever, can be sort of slotted in later as you need to, which makes it really accessible for new players. Already off the bat, it's a game that is really easy to get into, especially considering how easy it is to set up. All you need is your player board, some tokens, your dice, and then you get to draw 2 random doctors from the 14 that they have available, their hero cards, and shuffle them into your deck. And then you take your character cards and shuffle them into your deck, and that's it. So you end up with a deck of 40 cards, special unique die. Each faction has their own die, which is just a fun added bonus. So it's just super easy to set up and start playing, which is great. Like I mentioned a second ago, there are 14 different doctors that you can play as, and that's on top of the fact that each faction has 2 different characters you can play as, totaling 8 different characters. The different doctors get to pick 2, so there are, I can't do the math in my head, but there are a lot of different combinations on how you're going to build your own little character board. But then this game has a lot of character interaction, player interaction. There's a lot of taking the cards that you have from your deck or from the hero cards, the Doctor Who cards, and playing them on your opponent's board. It's the sort of game that, I mean, unless you play hundreds of times, which, absolutely go for it, no 2 game is ever going to be the same, even if you try your best, because there's always going to be different variables in considering which characters are being played, which heroes are available, which actions are chosen, and who goes where and what does what, all of that. That, in my mind, is one of the biggest draws of the game, is just how replayable it is. But on top of that, it is a game that really lets you sort of build and plan out a strategy in the long term, because you have a very clear understanding of everything you can do on your turn. Really easy to plan, okay, on this turn I'm going to do these, I'm going to play this card, and then on my next turn I can do this and move my character here so I can play the card, and then that'll let me do this. Like, it's really easy to sort of think ahead, hoping that no other player gets in the way. But ultimately, I think it's the sort of game that really lets you play with different strategies and tactics in how you want to engage with it. Each faction really has their own sort of unique play style. For example, the Weeping Angels. I play a lot of Magic the Gathering, and I really like your blue combo decks. So Weeping Angels was very much that sort of vibe. They have a special mechanic called Blink, where every time you take the blink action, every other minion or ongoing effect that you have that also has the blink action also gets to do that blink action. So the goal for Weeping Angels is to try to set up sort of this chain reaction of blinks that at a moment's notice, whenever at the key moment, you do this and it just sort of ripples through all these other effects and you get to do all these things in one sort of like big moment. And it's very satisfying. Meanwhile, the Daleks are much more about trying to control everything which tracks, and they have a lot of mechanics that deal with digging through their deck and sort of setting up the cards how they need them, and they can see other players' cards, and there's a lot of sort of manipulation of those sorts of things. So again, each faction really plays very differently, leaning into helping you want to play again, because not only could you play the same faction again with a different character, or you could just play an entirely new faction and try a whole different strategy and gameplay systems and all that. And it really does let you explore the different mechanics, and it's very satisfying in that way. However, like I sort of alluded to at the start of the video, I think one of the biggest issues this game has is how potentially luck-based it is. So for example, to also sort of highlight the replayability of the game in general, one of the ways you win is by completing a scheme. And every deck has a handful of scheme cards. Some of the hero cards also have their own scheme. So there's a lot of different win conditions baked into the game as well. So you never know which one you're going to get. But you never know which one you're going to get. So you could be sort of working towards, like, you start the game, you have an idea of the scheme that you're hoping to draw, and you're sort of building towards that, but then maybe you pick up a different scheme, and it's not really how you were building your setup, and you sort of have to change course halfway through, and I think that sort of highlights the main issue of the game. It is very luck-based. All of your resources are from your cards. So as you are trying to dig through your deck, and there is a lot of card draw. On your turn, you will be drawing a lot of cards. And not always, but there's that option. So you just have to sort of hope that sometimes you'll get that card you need, and sometimes you just won't. I think that really kind of highlights how the gameplay loop seems great on the surface, and it is a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. This is a fun game, but it's the sort of game where you have to be ready to accept that, I think it was Captain Picard who said, you can do everything right and still lose. That's basically what this game is. So if you're the sort of person who finds it frustrating when your grand schemes kind of falter, this one might not be for you. But if you are willing to sort of take that in stride and not get too bogged down about potentially losing just because you didn't get that card you need, or on the flip side, maybe your opponent is just, the heart of the cards and getting exactly what they need, and they win in faster than you could have set up your perfect plan anyway, because that can also kind of happen. It's a gameplay vibe that resonates with some people and just does not with others. And I think it's just something that you should be aware of if you are potentially interested in Doctor Who Nemesis. Just know that sometimes that is going to be a factor in the game. One of the great things about it is that even if that does happen, it's so easy to just start a new game because of how simple the components are. All you need to do is you would take your hero cards out of your deck, draw 2 new heroes, and shuffle those cards in instead, and potentially change which character you're playing if you want it, whatever. That helps sort of alleviate the potential frustrations that some people might run into about not loving how luck-based this game can be in those instances where you do have this grand scheme and it does come to fruition. I mean, that is the life of a Doctor Who villain, isn't it? Just having this scheme and it just being foibled by, something silly. If that sounds interesting, definitely go check out Doctor Who Nemesis from Gale Force 9. And if this video was at all helpful or insightful or inspiring or informational, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more tabletop gaming news and reviews. Again, I am Matt with BoLS. Thanks for watching. Bye.